Hey, this is Mike with the One Stop Co op Shop, and we are halfway through the year, getting to the end of June, which means it's time for my annual tradition of going through some of my favorite games from the year so far. And this has been a killer year already. I think the remaining 6 months of the year are really going to have to knock my socks off for most of these games to still not be in my top 10, top 15. So let's get to it. We're going to talk about some crowdfunding games and some release games, and disclaimer that I got review copies for a lot of these. So coming in at number 10 for crowdfunding and preview games, pre-order games, is Ironwood. This one I wasn't sure would make the list because if you didn't see my review and my playthrough, I think the solo mode is fairly flawed in a lot of ways. I don't like some of the decisions they made in the design of it. But the competitive game is a ton of fun, and the solo mode is still pretty cool. You just have to kind of ramp up the difficulty and have more units on the board to let the kludgy AI still present a significant challenge. So I still enjoy this one, but yeah, I think I'm mainly going to focus on it for competitive play unless there are some variants and house rules that can kind of fix things up. But still, solid game. That is number 10, Ironwood, the 1v1 asymmetric skirmish game with card-based combat. Pretty cool. Then for number 9, I have Wastelandia, and I'm recording this before the crowdfunding campaign finished, so I'm not sure if this game funded or not. Hopefully it did. But this is a dice placement cooperative game where you're trying to fight robots and other enemies. And I think this is a really cool system. I like the dice placement combos. I think it's a very tactical, interesting game. The cooperation is solid. The character variety is strong. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I hope it becomes a reality. That's Wastelandia, my number 9 for crowdfunding. And number 8 is a Button Shy release, and that's Aqua Rove and Rove Jr. And this one's a little bit weird because I adore Rove. It's one of my favorite games. And maybe this one should be like in the number 1 or number 2 spot because I also enjoy this new like kind of variant on Rove quite a bit. But also it's kind of the same game and they don't change that much stuff. So it feels kind of wrong to put it like way too high on the list. But yeah, Aqua Rove for a similarly complex but kind of different version of the Rove gameplay is great. And then Rove Jr. was reasonably fun for me, but my eldest son absolutely loved it. He actually recorded the playthrough portions. You're seeing his hands right now. So yeah, very good games, but just my number 8 because, again, I felt a little bit weird making them too high on the list. Next at number 7 is one of the Gabe Barrett solo series games. I've covered a bunch of these this year. He's doing one a month. This one is Dyson Crusoe. It's basically the Robinson Crusoe survival formula, but with dice placement and kind of like sort of rondelish movement. And I think this is really fun. There's a little bit of sameness in the early game, but the different scenarios, the different challenges are really cool. The way you use your dice is a ton of fun. It reminds me a bit of something like Nautilian, where you're sort of trying to like leverage your low and high results in good ways. So I think it's a really cool system. Really enjoy it. And yeah, Gabe Barrett's company is doing really nice work with these different games. So that's Dyson Crusoe, my number 7 for crowdfunding. And from a very small solo game to a very large cooperative game, this is Horror on the Orient Express at number 6. And yeah, this one probably would be a lot higher on the list, but it is a very large game. It has a lot of rules. It takes a long time to set up. It takes a pretty long time to play. And that's just not in my gaming budget of time as much these days. But I still really love this one. It's so thematic, so varied in the investigators and the actions you can take. And it's just very tense, very challenging. Although I was very appreciative I did this in my solo play. They added some easy difficulty levels that really do make the game very accessible if you want to have an easier time. Or you can ratchet it up to the hard level and get totally bodied, and that's cool too. So that's Horror in the Orient Express. Great game, my number 6 for crowdfunding. My number 5 is one I just covered this month, and that's Okinawa, The Last Battle for World War II, another Gabe Barrett one. And yeah, I went back and forth between having this one and Dyson Crusoe as my highest ranked game in his publishing series. And this one did win out. This is also kind of dice activation, dice placement-y stuff. Combined with a rondel where you're actually moving around and like activating these military units to fight off your opponents. There's a lot of cool choices in the dice. There's rolling luck, but in a fun way. The objectives are varied. The way you level up your units and like fight back is great. So yeah, I thought this is a really, really cool system. And right up there with Dyson Crusoe. They're both excellent. And again, they're both kind of similar with dice activation and rondels in a way. But I really enjoyed them both. That's Okinawa, The Last Battle for World War II, my number 5. And let's stick with that World War II theme with my number 4, which is Firefight Tactical, upcoming game from GMT. And yeah, this one is awesome. I love Combat Commander, the old World War II combat system. And this one kind of brings that to life with this dice activation system, with excellent solo co-op options with a cool AI. Really interesting use of terrain, really interesting way to represent command and control, really interesting kind of movement systems. I think it's a great way to bring sort of squad leader, combat commander mechanics into a dice-based system. And again, do it with a great solo co-op mode. So I'm super excited to see this one come to fruition. That's Firefight Tactical, my number 4. Then get into my really, really favorite ones for crowdfunding. Number 3 is Core of Discovery. This is kind of like Minesweeper or Search for Planet X in a kind of westward expansion theme. You're trying to explore this map, make logical judgments based on these rules of where terrain can appear while also making guesses. You fight against quite varied enemies and scenarios. And it's just a blast, a very tense time with solo and cooperative play, figuring out how to use your resources, how to use your time, what choices to make, how to fight off these enemies, how to avoid danger. I just love it. That's my number 3 for crowdfunding, Core of Discovery. My number 2 is One Hit Heroes. This is a very fun, it sort of reminds me of Sentinels of the Multiverse-ish, where your heroes are trying to fight different bosses. You have this cool threat or aggro bar system where you're trying to like kind of manage that to determine how much the enemy actually attacks you. The bosses are super varied. I only got to play 2 of the sets, so like 8 bosses in the prototype they sent me, but there's going to be, I think, 4 full sets in the full release. Really nice production. I love the co-op here. I love the character variety. And then you kind of like level up between fights, which is really cool. Just had a blast with this one, and it's probably number 2 because my kids also loved it so much and they wanted to keep on playing it. So that is One Hit Heroes, my number 2 for crowdfunding. And then my number 1, gosh, I love this game. And I think this one might have actually launched recently because I did my video way before the launch. This is Unstoppable, which is the latest in the Renegade solo series, although this one does have 2-player co-op play. I'm not saying that's the best way to play it. I certainly focus on it for solo, but I think it works fine. And yeah, this is a bit like Warp's Edge, also from the solo series, where you are defeating enemies to like kind of get upgrades to your hand. But then you're also doing card construction because it's a John D. Clare game like Mystic Vale and what is it? Dead Reckoning, all of those. And yeah, I just think this is such a fun system. The turn-to-turn play is great. It has really impactful deck building choices, really cool variety between the scenarios. I love Warp's Edge. I love this one too. I was just trying to play it as much as I could until I sent the prototype away. My most excited crowdfunding game that I've played this year so far, that is Unstoppable, my number 1. Then going over to released games, or about to release, because I got an early copy of this one. I think my plays and reviews should have gone up in the last week or so. This is Harakiri, which is a big game themed after sort of ancient, or a fantasy version of ancient Japan. It switches between an adventure mode, where you're traveling around on this map and trying to resolve these little story moments, and a more dungeon crawly exploration mode, where you're actually moving around and fighting miniatures. And both of them work pretty well. I won't say that either of them are best in class, but they both are pretty good. I did really like the way this one handled story and exploration. It's very cool. Now, this is a longer, more epic dungeon crawler kind of adventure game than I really have time to cover than play these days. I did play through Act 1 for this one, but I didn't even touch Act 2, which apparently means I missed out on a few things that are pretty cool. But yeah, I think big epic gamers will love this one. For me, it was good, but only reached up to number 10 because, again, it's kind of like too long and too big for me and my taste these days. But that's Harakiri, my number 10. Then at number 9, we have another recent one, Dawn of Madness. This is very similar to Harakiri. Not in that it's like the same kind of game, but it is a adventure game with tons of reading and narrative. And this one, I love the narrative. Some of the best story I've ever seen in a board game. The tactical play is pretty interesting too. The reason it's all the way down at number 9 instead of higher is because it is a little bit more complex than I think it maybe should be for the type of game and like the story focus that it's going for. And also that it takes a long time to play. If you didn't watch the playthrough or watch the review, we're talking like 6 to 12 hours for one of the scenarios, one of the stories in the game. So that's going to keep it from hitting my table too often. I'm still not sure if I'm going to keep it or not. But that is Dawn of Madness, my number 9. Still a great game if you love good story. And let's keep the train rolling with big campaign games that didn't quite reach higher on the list. My number 8 is Primal the Awakening. This is a boss battler with really great mechanics where you're kind of moving around these quadrants, facing off against unique enemies. I love a lot about this game, the abstract nature, the cool card combos, but I did get a little frustrated as I played, especially in co-op, with having to manage all the triggers and track all the different effects in the game. That means, again, it's not going to hit my table as much as I would like. So it's a great game, but only number 8. That's Primal the Awakening. And now let's get away from those giant games to something completely different. My number 7, which is Stone Spine Architect. This is a competitive card-laying game where you're trying to build a dungeon to score the most points possible. Has a really solid solo mode. I love the competitive play. Everything is simultaneous. It's got drafting. There's a lot of things to think about. You can never do everything in the game perfectly, so it has a lot of replay and strategic nuance. I just have a blast with this one, and it's been a hit with my competitive groups as well. So that's number 7, Stone Spine Architects. Next at number 6 is another tiny game, but from a big daddy series. That is Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs. This is the new solo iteration of Gloomhaven with a tiny footprint and a small price. And I think what they did here is amazing. The game's not perfect. It is very inaccessible if you don't already know Gloomhaven. It is very much a combat optimization puzzle, which is not always going to apply to people or appeal to people. It wasn't always my favorite, but I think it is super fun to just play Gloomhaven very quickly, try out different classes and stuff, and get through a game in 20 minutes or less. So an achievement that is worth celebrating. My number 6, Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs. Next at number 5 has been a favorite of mine this year, and that is Jekyll and Hyde, or Jekyll and Hyde versus Scotland Yard. Sorry, that's the full name. This is the 2-player cooperative-only trick-taking game. I love trick takers. I love ones that offer good 2-player play, and there aren't that many out there. And this is the best that I have found. This is my favorite 2-player cooperative trick taker. Again, that's a small list of games, but this one is so good. It beat out The Crew, at least for 2-player. It beat out Sail, some other games. So yeah, I just love this one. Definitely check it out if you are a trick-taking fan. That's my number 5, Jekyll and Hyde versus Scotland Yard. Next at number 4 is another great deck-building game. This is Slay the Spire, the board game implementation. If you like Slay the Spire, this is that. And that might, knock it down from being in a slightly higher space because I have played Slay the Spire, the video game, a ton, and this is basically the same thing. But man, it is still a great game for solo, especially if you haven't played the video game and don't have access to it in any other way. And it is awesome for co-op. What a great co-op implementation of this system without really changing any major rules. So yeah, I love Slay the Spire. Tons of fun. It is an awesome adventure deck building game, just going down into a dungeon and having cool fights and leveling up your unique class in fun ways. Great time, and it is my number 4. Next at number 3 is a game I've been singing the praises of for, it feels like years. This is Leviathan Wilds, the game where you and your friends are climbing on these giant creatures and trying to destroy crystals. I love the movement in this one. I love the tactical card play. Adore the variety in the character classes and in the bosses. What an amazing package with so much content and variety and kind of modularity for not too high of a price. I just think this game is amazing. I hope they make more stuff for it. That is my number 3, Leviathan Wilds. Then for my number 2, it is Agamonia, and I'm sure a lot of you were wondering if this would be my number 1. It and another game we're fighting out for it, and really they could be interchangeable. They're both awesome. So this is a adventure dungeon crawling game with some of the best exploration I've ever seen in a game. You're moving around, you're finding these little letters, they correspond to card, you discover cool things. The scenarios are so crazy varied game to game. It's got a great campaign system. The combat is just okay. That's maybe a big knock against the game. If you're coming for really cool tactical combat, the game doesn't have that much of that. But love the story, love the character focus, love the exploration. Fantastic game. One of my favorites of the year. Number 2, Agamonia. That brings me to my number 1. I'm sure a lot of you knew this would have to be on the list. It is Seventh Citadel. Man, I was a fan of Seventh Continent. I loved a lot about the game, but it also had a lot of frustrating and grindy portions. Seventh Citadel is like, hey, what if we just made all that a billion times better, but kept all the stuff you loved? And I'm like, yes, I am here for it. So yeah, Seventh Citadel, my favorite game of the year. Although again, really close to Agamonia, I could go either way with this. I am currently, as of the recording of this, backing the new expansion for Seventh Citadel to get even more content. Although I haven't finished everything yet, but I adore this game. Such a good time. Go definitely check it out. So there you go, a pretty amazing set of games, if I do say so myself, but I'm looking forward to see what the rest of the year has in store. Maybe it'll be one for the record books. And let me know in the comments which games are your favorites so far this year. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.